In a world where billions of people do not have a clue about the forces that control their health, these people go about their day in a life and death struggle, while minds that are calculating and unsympathetic make decisions that will affect their very lives.
Many times we need to keep our health in check, but don't know what questions to ask or where to begin. We walk in blindly to our healthcare provider and walk out none the wiser, and maybe even more confused than before. Can you take charge of your health and arm yourself with the questions and preparedness you need? The answer is yes. Welcome to Occupy Health with Dr. Susan Downs. This program will answer your questions and give you the best practices for facing your medical partner in good health. Now, here's Dr. Susan Downs.
Welcome to Occupy Health. This is Dr. Susan. We have discussed with our guest many lifestyle and environmental things that could affect our health, diet, exposure to toxins, environmental pollutions, and these all have adverse effects in our lives. Dr. Bredesen even commented how toxins, possibly even electromagnetic fields, could contribute to the progression of autism. So let's look a little bit at electromagnetic fields. Studies have shown electromagnetic fields lead to mitochondrial damage, oxidative stress, DNA damage, immune disturbances, leaky gut, leaky brain, neuroinflammation, and these are all the culprits and things that are involved in the lead to chronic diseases. So a question is, these invisible things called electromagnetic frequency, can these affect our health? Well, WHO classified electromagnetic radiation as a possible level 2 carcinogen along with DDT. So this has to make us at least question. Then we can look at the studies. Hardell in Sweden showed that cell phones increase the risk of glioma and acoustic neuroma. Also, other studies looking at the brain, 4 hours of exposure per day disrupts the human brain cell's ability to repair damaged genes. And that low-level EMF makes the blood-brain barrier of rats permeable, so all the bad things get in. And then rats are exposed to electromagnetic frequencies, no longer remember locations to previously familiar cases. But the issues and studies don't stop there. Studies on sperm show that electromagnetic frequency decreases the motility, the number of sperm, and abnormalities in the sperm and oxidative stress, which we know is a recipe for further diseases. And exposure to electromagnetic frequencies may prevent egg implantation, like if it's done 2 hours previously. Many guests have talked about sleep, how important that is in our health. That's when we're supposed to have this restorative period to take care of the problems and toxins that we may have accumulated the day before. But cell phones interfere with sleep. They delay sleep onset and the waking sleep cycle. But more concern is, what did it do to pregnant women? Studies have shown, there's Hugh Taylor at Yale and Suleyman in Turkey, that it affects the cognitive abilities of the offspring. The offspring are born with increased anxiety and ADHD-like symptoms. They can be hyperactive with impaired memory. This sounds pretty alarming. Now, you might say, well, this is nonsense. The studies show that this is not a major issue. But the guidelines, at least in the U.S., were set back in 1996. And would you want to fly in an airplane where the standards are 1996? And they looked at heat as a major cause. But heat is not the major problem. It appears one of the major problems is the fluctuating level of frequencies, especially when there's a weak signal and your device is looking for a cell tower or a strong signal. So what do we do about this? This is pretty scary. There's also a set of people who are electromagnetically sensitive. So we're going to look at this a little further because our guest today is Guy Hudson, who's been pioneering various remedies to what do we do to protect ourselves. I mean, we're all going to be using these devices. They're not going to go away. But how can we do safe tech? How can we live in this sea of wonderful modern technology and protect ourselves at the same time? Well, Guy has been working very hard on that issue. And a brief history of Guy: he worked as an engineer in structural design to make cars safe. Then he worked on IT for the design of motor cars, and then in general IT and management. He traveled a lot, and the rest of the story I will leave to Guy. So Guy, welcome.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Okay, so tell the audience, how did you get involved with your concern for electromagnetic frequencies? Tell us about your experience and what has happened to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, at university, I studied physics, and a big module in that is electromagnetism and electromagnetic waves, and also quantum mechanics. And they're all closely related, and particularly quantum mechanics with the interaction with electromagnetics and biology. So I worked as a straightforward vehicle engineer, doing mathematical simulation of crashes and things like that. And then I got ever more senior roles in doing IT strategy and fixing IT problems, until I got a job in Sweden working for one of their big companies, and 50 meters from my desk there were 32 cell masts on test, blatting away full power.
What is a cell mast for the audience?
Oh, okay. Well, when you use your mobile phone, there's a network of transmitter receivers on the top of a pole or mast.
Oh, you mean a cell tower?
Yes, a cell tower. Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
Sorry. Oh, yeah. That's just Sorry. This is well, we're two nations divided by a common language, aren't we? Really?
Yes, we sure are.
So I grew up. So I'm English. I'm British. I grew up near Oxford, and I've lived most of my life in England. Although I've visited America many times, and I've worked for American companies, and so I feel I know the US quite well. Meanwhile, and I have a lot of friends there. So where were we? Yes, so I got zapped by 30 cell masts just across the road from where I was working, and I didn't know then, but I know now what to call it. It's called brain fog, and it's to do with the mitochondria. The mitochondrial action to generate energy for the cell gets disrupted in a number of different ways, because the number of interactions between electromagnetic waves, i.e. Wi-Fi and cell phones and that kind of thing, are very many different types, because the body is so complex. There are so many different chemical reactions going on, and they're all pretty badly affected by this stuff. And there's one interesting thing that microwaves aren't just used in ovens, microwave ovens, but it's that narrow band of frequencies which is just below infrared. So you've got light as a narrow set of the rainbow, the spectrum of light. And then if you go down below the red end, i.e. when the frequency is a bit lower, you get infrared or below red, and that's heat energy. And we get a lot of that from the sun and from all our heating systems and all of that kind of stuff. And that actually, because we have evolved with that, it means that our body is very happy with infrared radiation. But because microwave radiation is absorbed by water, and that's how a microwave oven works. You know that the bits of food with water in them heat up, your glass of milk heats up, but the actual glass that it's in doesn't, or the plate it's standing on doesn't heat up because there's no water in it. Now what that means is that the waves don't travel very far because there's water in the air, water vapor in the air, there's moisture in the air. And that's really great for if you've got you've got a city with hundreds of Wi-Fi transmitters or mobile phones. The waves don't go very far, so they don't all interfere with each other. And so telecoms engineers use microwaves because they're absorbed by water. There's a slight problem with that. Guess what? 99% of us, counting the number of molecules, we are 99% by the number of molecules water. So if you're in a room with a microwave transmitter, i.e. an oven or a microwave or Wi-Fi transmitter, we are the biggest absorbers of all of that, apart from the pot plant as well, I suppose. But, you know, we are the biggest absorber of that. And not only that, we are not protected. We're not, our bodies are not used to having to protect ourselves from that. It's only in the last generation, the last 20 years, where the amount of microwave radiation has gone up so very, very strongly. And everybody is affected. There are a number of doctors that have done tests on immune function to find that there is, if anybody at all is put in a microwave field, i.e. in the field of a cell master or a mobile phone or a Wi-Fi transmitter, they have changes to their blood, which is seen as an immune response. Now, sometimes that causes symptoms, which are very recognizable, and people who respond like that are called electrosensitive or electro-hypersensitive, and more people is slowly people are beginning to recognize these terms, and it's what happened to me. And so I, having worked in this environment with it absolutely saturated with mobile phone radiation from the cell towers, I had 2 years of great discomfort. So I had cluster headaches, I had brain fog, so I just couldn't think straight, and I couldn't sleep either, and I had massive headaches, cluster headaches. So they were migraine, it was trigeminal neuralgia, and ME, myalgic encephalitis. So so I had spent 2 years in denial, thinking, no, Guy, you can't be electrosensitive because it means you've got to give your job up, and you can't give your job up because I used to like my job. And it took me 2 years to sort of wake up to the fact properly and not be in denial. And then as soon as I switched off all my sources of microwaves and constructed what's called a Faraday cage, or shielded my own bedroom, I started to get better week by week. And now I live, I have to be careful, but I live a very normal life now, and able to go on the train to big city or travel by aircraft if I'm really careful. Because I wear protective clothing, and which works very well. It just reflects the microwaves away. So it's an interesting journey that I've been on, and one where as soon as I'd fixed things for myself, and I find this with other customers, the immediate impulse is to want to help other people in the same situation. So that's really what I've been doing for the last 7 or 8 years. And being a sort of practical engineering type, used to kind of finding solutions and answers, I've actually developed a number of techniques to improve how shielding works, and also something called electromagnetic hygiene. So how you use anyone who's brought up a youngster knows how much effort there is in hygiene and washing hands and toilet training and eating cleanly and all that kind of stuff. And it's the same thing's got to happen with use of technology now, in order to reduce your exposure, your everyday exposure. You can reduce your everyday exposure by a factor of at least 1,000 times if you're careful, and that means using your computer wired and so on. There's many different things.
I would like to interject and say something here. The electromagnetic hypersensitivity, this is not a small group of people. The estimates have been from 1.5% of the population in Sweden to 13.5% of the population in Taiwan. There are a lot of different symptoms, which Guy will get into. And there's actually something in Korea called digital dementia. I mean, up to, it's very similar to dementia, autism, and there's a very high use for mobile devices there. Other things I'd like to point out about the cell towers, this is not something benign. In San Diego, there was a fire department, and they put cell towers on top of it. all the firemen got sick until they removed the cell towers. Even more interesting is I interviewed many farmers in Switzerland, and they didn't know what was happening to them, but they all got sick. Their animals got sick. Their plants got sick. So we just can't say it's all in their head because they're plants and animals as well. Well, there was a man that went in and did something called biological geometry, and he managed to address that situation so they're feeling better. So anyway, this is a serious problem. So, Guy, what were your symptoms other than the the brain fog that you had when you had these problems?
Brain fog is pretty serious. You just sit at your laptop wanting to do some work and you can't. Your thoughts don't work. And so you become kind of, your brain becomes completely disoriented and you're just not able to function as a person. And so that's bad enough. But the migraines, so I had migraines one side, then the other, trigeminal neuralgia, which is extraordinary pain. So it's like someone driving a nail into your eye socket.
Yes, I've had that. I know it.
Oh, right. Okay. You know what it's like. So supposedly, yes. So that, what is it? Female women who have had this said that the pain is worse than childbirth. I'm afraid I'm not able to comment, I'm not able to confirm that, but it was excruciating, absolutely, utterly unbelievable. I went to a doctor and he said, well, Mr. Hudson, on a scale of 1 to 10, well, how much does it hurt? And I thought, you cheeky person, how dare you? It's 100 out of 10. It's so bad you can't describe it. It is really, really bad. And actually, it's made a lot worse by, you hear some really tragic tales. There was a girl in England who committed suicide 2 years ago. She was 15, It
is known as a suicide disease. If you look up trigeminal neuralgia, it's also called the suicide disease.
Right. I can absolutely believe it, honestly. I mean, I've got a very loving family, and goodness knows what I would have done if I didn't have them. This lovely young girl who was very, very talented and pitched to go to university and all this kind of stuff, ended her life because the teachers wouldn't listen about her headaches, and that they would refuse to switch the Wi-Fi off, which was causing so much pain. And the problem with being electrosensitive is that a lot of people's partners or family don't believe it, and they're not supported in any way. And I'm afraid a lot of people end up getting treated as if they have mental problems, which doesn't really help at all. So the symptoms, the classic book on the subject of electrohypersensitivity, lists 100 symptoms, and really every system in the body is affected because some way or another different frequencies will actually go right through your body and affect every system. I mean, one example about sleep disruption is that the pineal gland in the middle of the skull has got branches of the optic nerve, so to tell the pineal gland that regulates sleeping and waking, whether it's daylight or not. But microwaves, which equally affect the pineal gland, actually pass through the skull. So that if you've got a microwave transmitter, you've got your mobile phone under your pillow or something, it's constantly telling your pineal gland that it's daylight, stay awake. And so that's why it's terribly important to, especially while you're your sleeping hours, to cut back on the radiation so that you've got time to heal. Incredibly important, that.
Another thing is cordless phones, I understand, because they are two-way microwave radios, and they're going 24/7. So cordless phones, I think, can be even worse than cell phones. And in a lot of these studies, I think that could be a confounding factor because, might be measuring people's use of cell phones, but are they accounting for the use of cordless phones? So, even cordless phones can even have a higher risk of adverse health effects. So I guess you would recommend to get a landline rather than the cordless phone. Yes,
that leads me to say a whole host of things, actually. Yeah, so when you've got a cordless phone, there are two parts to it. One is the base station, the base transmitter that you connect to your phone line. And then the others are the handsets around the house. And the handsets have got their own charging cradle, typically to keep the batteries topped up. And so that transmits, so your handsets, when you're not on them, don't transmit. They are just dormant there. But the base station keeps blatting away night and day. And with all of these things, distance is your friend. So the further you are away from a transmitter, the weaker the signal. And because the transmitter that's on all the time, unlike most phone cell, what did you call them? Not cell masts, cell towers.
Towers.
Most cell towers are at a distance, typically, between 100 and 500 meters, say, or half a mile away. They're much weaker. The signals are actually much weaker than the signals from your own in-house cordless phone. And also the patterns of the signals, so they pulse to give the data, which tells you what you're trying to communicate. Your voice is broken up into little packets and sent on little pulses, and it's those pulses. So if you could imagine the average power density, the average power coming off a candle, and the average power off a strobe light or say a camera flash. The camera flash or the strobe light is just instantaneous, whereas the candle carries on and on and on for many hours. But they could have still the same average power. It's just that it's very, very peaky if it's the strobe light. Now, it's the strobe light that causes the problem. So, whereas the candle doesn't, because it's just to such little power. So, I just want to make the point that the pattern of the communication, the pulses that are coming out of these digital devices, is critical to how much they affect you. And so that the actual patterns coming out of the cordless phone transmitter are seen as particularly likely to cause disruption to biological systems. The other point is that many people consider hypersensitivity, electromagnetic hypersensitivity, like any other allergy, like a food allergy, like gluten or whatever. And the standard way of curing, there are many different ways of curing and making people less sensitive. But all of them you have in common that what you first of all do is stop the person eating that allergy, stop eating gluten or whatever if it's a gluten allergy. And so they get right away from it so that you actually have a rest from the toxin. And it's the same with electromagnetic radiation. So if you can get people's radiation exposure below their trigger level, below their sensitivity, their immune system isn't going to be triggered all the time, and it allows time for the body to relax and heal itself. Now, the level of sensitivity, if you're constantly being triggered, normally the level of sensitivity, the trigger level, goes down and down and down. In other words, weaker and weaker signals trigger your sensitivity and your symptoms. And when that happens, it means if you get down to the level, so if you take the example of a cordless phone, it might be that your immune system's only triggered when you're holding one of these things right by your head. But if you keep on being overstimulated and have too much of this, you will eventually get more and more sensitive until you are sensitive to devices that are going 24 hours a day. So in your home, that's your Wi-Fi transmitter and your cordless phone. And once you become sensitive to that, as I did, that really means you're in for a lot of trouble because your symptoms just get worse and worse and worse. So,
yes, there's no place in this planet that you can get away from cell towers because even I think in the Himalayas and very remote places and in the mountains of Switzerland, they're everywhere. One interesting fact I find is that in 1996 in the U.S., they passed a law that you cannot stop the placement of a cell tower for health reasons. Do you think they knew something?
Yes, I think they did. And also, I think that the legislation being proposed for 5G in the States is is the same basis, apart from near fire stations, because of the problems that they know, and they know that the Firemen's Union would come out against them.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be a problem. Other countries have a different approach. For example, in Israel and France, they don't allow Wi-Fi's in preschools, and children are particularly sensitive. Their heads are smaller, their skulls, the protective skull is thinner, and it can penetrate through their brain more quickly, and their cells are dividing quickly. Belgium, apparently it's not legal to give a child a cell phone. And in Turkey, it's illegal to advertise cell phones to children. So some countries are actually recognizing this and doing something.
Absolutely. And Britain started to do something in the 2000s, but it's just gone by the wayside.
What stopped them?
Industry lobbying. I mean, it's the biggest industry the world has ever known, the telecoms industry, much bigger than defense, even bigger than food production, or the monetized part of food production. And so tiny little crumbs off the table of their marketing budget get used to disrupt campaigns, so that, it just, and also there is the case that a lot of media, like newspapers, get a lot of revenue from advertising cell phones, and therefore they don't like to upset their funders.
Okay, we're coming close to a break. Looks like we're just about there. So I would like to say that one thing in the United States, our head of the FCC was a very strong cell phone lobbyist, and I think he's been so I think the whole thing is just a mixed picture in the U.S. if you've got the primary lobbyists that are running the Federal Communications Center. We're at a break now, and we will be back.
Program.
Welcome back to Occupy Health. This is Dr. Susan talking to Guy Hudson, who is describing the difficulties of people who are sensitive to electromagnetic frequencies. I mean, we might have thought, well, this is kind of bizarre, but when many farmers in Switzerland start having these brain fog problems and these very serious health problems when the cell tower goes in, and they're animals and plants, and many people are complaining about this, this is not something we can discount. We need to be aware of this and more sensitive to it, especially with our children. So aren't children at increased risk?
Absolutely, of course they are. They're growing fast, their cells are dividing faster, their skin, their skulls are thinner, and they're just a lot more susceptible to damage, which is going to affect them later in life. And my own personal view is that a lot of the disruption with ADHD and autism and all that kind of stuff, this is a contributory factor. I wouldn't say it's
absolutely, because Hugh Taylor at Yale was studying, and he found that the offspring did have hyperactive types reactions. And I think Martha Herbert, who is at Stanford, very definitely thinks there's a connection between autism and EMF. Now, EMF is not the only contributor. There's so many other toxic things running around our environment, such as glyphosate and various toxins. So we don't know what's the cause and what's the association, but I do believe all these things are contributing. And, we have mothers giving kids iPads to entertain them. And, so there's gadgets that women are putting in their vagina that are that have got Wi-Fi so they can, play music to the baby. I mean, there's remote-controlled Wi-Fi vibrators that the women can use. I mean, there's onesies that they put little Wi-Fi on to measure the baby's heart rate so the mother doesn't have to go pick the baby up to see how it's doing. I mean, this is scary. What's it going to do to our next generation?
Well, it's quite interesting because one of the very common symptoms, as I said, there are, several hundred symptoms altogether from electrohypersensitivity. One of the most common ones, certainly one I had, was heart arrhythmia. And so it's very reasonable to assume that electromagnetic pollution is going to cause problems with the heart. The most powerful electrical signal in our body is a heartbeat, and that is the big one to be quite seriously affected. And I had it most of my life, and would wake up very often with a big pulse from my heart after it hadn't been beating for a while. But to be honest, since I've sorted my electromagnetic environment, I really don't have it at all now. My heart beats absolutely regular.
Yes, heartbeat is one of the main symptoms, along with glucose metabolism disruption. I'm told that if you get near dirty electricity, that your blood sugar levels can go up along with the heart rate. I mean, these are physical symptoms. This is hard to deny, although it seems that the studies, whenever there's a study showing there's possible difficulties, it's amazing how another study, funding source unknown, comes out to confuse the issue or diffuse the issue.
Yes, what we're supposed to do, according to industry, and it's the same lobbyists that defended the tobacco industry, according to them, we're supposed to average results, so that if there are 3 studies which say there's no effect, and there's 1 study that there is an effect, then we're supposed to average it all out and say, well, actually, there's no real effect. But imagine if you're on Treasure Island and the captain says to his sailors, right, go out and find, here's the black spot, go and find the treasure. And one comes back and says, I found the treasure. And he said, oh no, we're going to average results, there's no treasure. You know what I mean? It's just nonsense.
Yes, it is.
You can't proceed like that.
So how does somebody know if they're electrosensitive?
We all are. But fundamentally, biologically, we are sensitive. One definition of electrosensitivity, we are. Now, the more common definition is, so there is a very strong interaction between our bodies in all its different systems, nerves, blood, whatever, skin, brain, all of that are all affected. So we're all electrosensitive, but people who are health conscious should cut back on this toxin, and there are many ways you can do it. Are you still there?
Yeah, I hope our audience is still there. We want to hear how to do it.
Okay, good. It all went quiet. My screen changed. So so you mentioned dirty electricity. Now, so if we go through what's called the electromagnetic spectrum, so the frequency from where it's absolute, there's no vibration, it's all just still. Like the Earth's magnetic field is almost completely still. There's slight vibrations in it, but for most purposes, it's completely still. And also there's something called electrostatic. So on a dry day, when you touch a car body, you get a zap. That is when static electricity builds up. And then the next most important one is 60 hertz in the States, 60 cycles a second. That's the noise, the hum you get from your hi-fi loudspeakers when things aren't set up quite right. So that's mains hum, and you get that frequencies from pylons, from all the wiring around your house, and so that we experience that ever since we were born, or even while we were growing in the womb. And a lot of people are pretty sensitive to that, although it's not as sensitive as other frequencies. If you then take the electronics we plug into our mains. So it's all typically, a power supply for charging a mobile phone, power supply for charging a laptop, the power supply inside your TV, and so on. It goes on. All these little power supplies work at between 30 and 70,000 cycles a second. So in order to make them more efficient and produce less heat and more electricity out the same tiny device, they've upped the frequency. And if they're not designed or manufactured really well, or if they develop a fault, it means they will put those signals on the mains. And that's the main cause of dirty electricity. And so that the 30 to 70,000 cycles a second is the bottom end of radio. So in other words, all the wires in your house suddenly become aerials and they radiate out at you. And that particularly disturbs your blood and gives you, as you mentioned earlier, Magda Havas's work about the unstable diabetics that get set off by dirty electricity. Now,
can't you use an M-wave filter or a Stetzler filter to at least address the dirty electricity part?
Yes, you can, and I've installed a lot of them, hundreds in fact, but they are not. I have contacts with a lot of electrical engineers, and there are actually better ways of doing it now that have been developed. So yes, do use those. They are a bit hit and miss, so you'll plug them in and you find it won't make any difference, because there are actually three causes of dirty electricity on those frequency bands, and one is external radio, and you're picking up the external radio sources, and secondly is other people's dirty electricity, and that's mainly from solar panels, or car charging is growing. So if people have got solar panels, they have a thing called an inverter in the roof. It's a box of electronics which generates mains frequency, so that you can sell your electricity. The electricity coming off your roof gets pumped into the grid, and you can get paid for that. Now those inverters don't make clean electricity typically, unless you pay for a rather expensive one. And that again affects not only you, but all the other people on the same loop from the substation. So
what can you do for the dirty electricity?
Well, there are a range of filters, basically, electrical filters of different types. And Stetzers and Greenwave are but one particular type. And they are very simple things electronically, and they're not always capable of curing the problem.
Now, my electricity provider, EDF, is pushing to put a smart meter in my flat. What do you think of smart meters?
Where do you start? A good friend of mine who lives in England, he runs something called Stop Smart Meters UK. That's a very good resource. Basically, there are four reasons. One is that it makes a lot of dirty electricity, and mostly because they're all using the same little power supplies, and they're all connected to the grid. They kind of add up and make it all worse. So that's the first thing. Secondly is data security. It allows external people to know, because of a particular signal, when you're taking a shower, when you're putting a kettle on, when you've got your lights on, and when you haven't. So external, not only the electricity companies, but organized crime can know when you're at home and when you're not. So that's the third thing. Fourth thing, the most important, is that, like the strobe lights, so what they typically do is there are different sorts, but the ones in the UK and a lot of the type in the States have got two transmitters. They've got one transmitter for inside the house, which tells you how much electricity you're using. And that's got one particular kind of characteristic pulsing. And then there's another transmitter which sends the data back to the utility through a network of towers, which tells the utility how much electricity you are using. And that is the one which has got a stronger signal. And it's in London, it goes tick, 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 night and day, 365 days a year. And the problem is with that, it's like Chinese water torture. The actual signal itself is short-lived and it's not massively powerful, but just like Chinese water torture, it will get you. So you need to shield yourself. If a neighbor gets one, you need to shield yourself from it. And most electricity companies now are sympathetic to those people who say they don't want a smart meter.
Well, when I spoke to EDF, they sounded like they thought I was kind of nuts about that. Why don't you tell us how we can protect ourselves, and how do we do safe tech Tell us about your clothing. Tell us, some people paint the walls. You mentioned Faraday cages. Obviously it depends how aware we are of our sensitivity to it. So tell us how to protect ourselves.
Okay, so you need to make sure that you're not triggered. So that if you're a really, really sensitive person who's having a hard time with a lot of heavy symptoms, you need to get a good, strong level of protection. Whereas if you've got milder symptoms and you're not triggered, you're only triggered when you're in a really bad level of electrosmog, like a commuter train or something like that, then you can probably, as long as while you're sleeping, you've got a really, really low level, then you should be able to keep your symptoms in check. However, those people who are health conscious for themselves and for their families should consider that electrosmog is very aging. And it's aging because of a particular effect on the blood, that the red blood cells are kept apart by an electronic charge. So it's an electrical process that allows our blood to flow freely, so that our sticky red cells are kept apart in the blood serum. And so that when they enter a capillary, which is only just big enough to let these rather large red cells in, if two are stuck together and are trying to get in, the thing blocks up. So that particular areas like lining of the gut, the retinas, and all of that kind of stuff, where there's a lot of regrowth of cells on almost a daily basis, those tend to clog up and they don't get replaced, and therefore those systems begin to fail as you get older. So if you want to keep young and beautiful and healthy and all that kind of stuff, cut your electrosmog.
Tell us how to do this.
Okay, well, so I started off, I was talking about statics, electrostatics, magnetostatics, then I talked about mains frequency, and then I talked about dirty electricity frequencies, the bottom of radio. But then radio over the years, so it started out in the 1910, 1920s, a rather low frequency radio, so-called long wave. And then as time has gone on, they've been able to develop the electronics to make faster and faster frequencies, and so that microwaves, for instance, are gigahertz. So we all know about gigabytes as in terms of computer memory, but these are gigahertz. So that's 1,000 million cycles a second. So they've got some pretty smart technology there these days in mobile phones that allows waves to be produced that quickly. And what that will mean is that a lot of information can be carried on those waves, and also, as I spoke to earlier, they don't go very far, so that phones from different cities don't interfere with each other. Now, the good news is that the microwave frequencies are near enough to light frequencies to behave quite like light, so they can be reflected. So if you put a sheet of aluminium up and you put your mobile phone one side of it, you won't get a signal the other side, because the microwaves will not go through. So the other thing is that other things reflect, so that if you've got reflective surfaces, so if a fridge happens to be behind you and that reflects back as well, that will send out signals from your mobile phone and scatter them, and so they'll be reflected off lots of different things. And so therefore, if you want to make a really good, there are situations where there's one big transmitter on one side. So there's a case where you've got people working by an airport radar or something. So this is a very, very powerful thing. You shield one wall, one side facing the transmitter, and you'll see a massive reduction in microwave energy in the office. But typically, say people living in cities, like particularly flats, from all six sides, below, above, and all 4 points of the compass, you will see other people's Wi-Fi, other people's cordless phones, cell towers, all that kind of stuff. So it's a great bit, that's why it's called electrosmog, because there's so many different sources now. So you really need to shield and in all 6 sides of your bedroom, and to a lesser extent where you spend time in your office, or where you sit down and watch telly, or sit around in the kitchen and eat, and that kind of thing. And the general reckoning for where you really need to concentrate is anywhere you spend more than 4 hours a day. So for particularly for the bedrooms, then you shield all the walls. Now you can paint. The paint is black or dark grey, and you need 2 coats. And it needs to be on a very good surface, because if there are cracks or you miss bits around the corners and all that sort of stuff, the microwaves will leak in. And then you need 3 coats of white on top. And if it's been at all streaky, then microwaves will come in through the thin bits of paint. So I recommend instead wallpaper. And so if you put wallpaper up, you're guaranteed on its thickness. You have to connect across the sheets, and so read my website on how to do it. And then I have a reflective layer first, and then once you've created 6 sides of your bedroom is all reflective, you have to be careful that any leak, they always get some tiny leakage of signals coming in, that those signals will just bounce off each other. So the signals will bounce off opposite walls, and you get what's called internal reflection. And you don't want that. That's very upsetting for electrosensitives. And so that I recommend, you could buy it off my website, a specialist paper that was developed for the purpose. It actually absorbs microwaves. So it's like the acoustic equivalent will be putting carpet up on the wall. So any waves that hit the wall just get absorbed and damped away. And so therefore you end up with a very, very quiet environment. Now, when it comes to windows, you can either put curtains up, and so the lining of your curtains can be a bit like a net curtain stuff. There's some silver-based materials. They're very expensive. They look quite nice. They tend to go a bit brown after the time because the silver corrodes. I prefer stainless steel, so all the materials we've got on our website are stainless steel because it's cheaper, and because you can get the density of the tiny filaments much more because you can afford it. It gives a very much better protection. So
well, let me interject here. If we don't want black walls, it sounds like a very heavy undertaking. What about if we just wear some of the protective clothing? And I notice yours is like covering the important body parts. It could be a T-shirt and shorts and maybe a beanie for the head. But let's make a diversion into telling people some other things they can do. For example, using a cell phone in any kind of metal enclosure, such as an elevator, a car, a train, a plane. It means your head is the antenna, which is risky, but it's even more risky when it's moving. So you're going from a cell tower to cell tower. You've got points where it's weak and searching for a signal. So using a cell phone in a moving vehicle is a risk. Also, if you look at your devices, it'll say, the iPads used to say keep them 8 inches away from you. So distance is your friend. I also understand if you do use earphones, you don't want a metal wire because that's just bringing the signal away to your head. You need earphones filled with air. So distance is your friend. It sounds like we need to keep it away from us at night so we get that restorative time. What else would you like to add, Guy?
Oh, there's lots. So let's look at the air tube headsets. So the headsets you're talking about are modified, say, in their design. So there's a wire up to the dongle. The dongle's got the microphone, it's got the on-off switch, just like a normal one, but it's also got the loudspeaker in it. And the loudspeaker then, the noise from the loudspeaker goes up an air tube, just an open tube, to an earpiece, which is just a dumb piece of plastic that fits your ear. And the great thing about earlier, you mentioned acoustic neuromas, which is cancer of the nerve to your ear.
I have one. I know all about them. Yes. Okay,
so what appears to be the most damaging frequency of all is acoustic frequency, i.e. sound frequency, but magnetic frequency. acoustic frequency magnetic fields are the worst. Now, when you have an earpiece in your ear, it means that you've got acoustic frequency magnetic fields right by your acoustic nerve. So that's another reason. It's not only the microwaves traveling up the wire to your head, it's also avoiding acoustic neuromas.
So would you recommend against the earpieces?
No, I was just saying they're very important to use. You must.
Okay. I'd also like to point out that Innocente Marcellini in Italy, he won a Supreme Court case that they said his brain tumor was caused by his use of cell phone. The government decided that. So I just wanted to let you know. Anyway, let's see. Okay, we're coming down sort of to the end. We've got 4 minutes left. So, Guy, I would like you to summarize and let people know how to get a hold of you.
Okay, so I run a website called Beneficial Environments. So if you Google Beneficial Environments, there are videos there are different resources, there's a shop for equipment, and there's a way of just contacting me if you want to ask me questions. And I'm very happy to do that. Now, and I do surveys. That my core business is going around surveying, because there are so many different sources of electromagnetics that if I can be there and measure with my equipment, then that's very, very useful. Now, we don't have any natural senses for detecting either low frequency or high frequency. And on my website, there are 2 meters that I thoroughly recommend. They're very robust. You put them in your pocket and you can't make a mistake with them. There are some cheaper meters around, but they are difficult to use and you can easily make mistakes with them. The 2 on my website are the ones to use. That's that. Be careful how you use all technology. For instance, blenders, anything with a powerful motor, vacuum cleaners. Make sure that you are about at least a foot away from them. So don't carry your vacuum cleaner around when it's on. Don't stand close to your blender when you're using it in the morning. Lots of health conscious people do that and zap themselves pretty badly for the start to the day. And there's an ebook with all this information in that's free that you can download off my website. So I recommend that as well. So there's 2 sides to this. One is building protection in your life so that you don't have to get the everyday exposure. And the other thing is electromagnetic hygiene, so that when you're using technology, you actually minimize your exposure. So it means always use a wired computer, switch your Wi-Fi off. You can even, the latest version of iOS, in other words, iPhones and iPads, you can use Ethernet. So you can plug, and it's on my website how to do it, you can plug them in and use them wired. And so you haven't got the Wi-Fi. It's the Wi-Fi transmitter that is by far the worst electrosmog part of using an iPad.
Yes, and also distance is our friend. I mean, in the cell phones, very hidden. You've got to go through several layers. It does say to keep it at least, 0.8 of a centimeter away from your head. I mean, most people put it up to their ear, and I cringe because there's a lot of people getting brain tumors from that. So distance is your friend. Practice safe.
Okay, so what in terms of smartphones, there are 5 different transmitters. So switch off position, switch off 4G.
I have to interrupt here because we're coming to an end. And women, don't put it in your bras. I mean, there's bras that will hold these puppies, but there's a lot of women that are getting these highly unusual tumors from the cell phone put in their bra. We're coming to a close, so I want the audience to investigate this, share the information, do your research so you can help yourself and others, and be well.
We got the power to change the world.
Thank you for listening. Occupy Health with Dr. Susan Downs can be heard live every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time and 11 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. Here's to better health for you this week.